We now have a basic dialog created. The problem is there's no controls, there's no buttons. This dialog doesn't do anything. In the next part of the tutorial, we're going to be adding in the layout along with all of the controls necessary to make this a useful tool. I'll start by creating a new method called createLayout. Now this method will be responsible for handling all of the layout, button, and control creation. To start off, I'm going to create a main layout. This is the master layout for the dialog itself. It can contain other layouts or any controls. The layout itself is going to be a vertical box layout. This will allow the controls and the other layouts to be stacked one on top of the other. Next, I'll assign the main layout to the dialog itself. I do this by calling the setLayout method and passing in the main layout. Again, executing the code, nothing has changed because we haven't actually added any controls yet. So we'll start off by creating the buttons. There's two buttons in this dialog, a refresh button as well as a cancel button. Both buttons are Q push button objects. This is a standard Qt widget. Next, I'll create a separate layout specifically for the buttons. I'll call this button layout. And this one is going to be a horizontal box layout. This allows the buttons to be displayed next to each other in a left to right fashion. I need to add the buttons to the layout. For this, I'll just call the add widget method. And lastly, I need to add the button layout to the main layout. I want to add a layout, not a widget, and that's the button layout. So currently, this method isn't being called. We want it to be called whenever the dialog itself is created. So I'm simply going to add a call to create layout in the init method. Now when I run the code, you're going to see the two buttons have been added to the dialog. Of course, this isn't where we expect the buttons to be displayed. We want to see them down at the bottom and pushed off to the right. In order to do this, I'll add a stretch to the button layout. So I can call the method addStretch. And I'm adding it before I add the widgets. So the stretch is going to be to the left-hand side of the refresh button. When I hit enter, you're going to see that the buttons themselves have been pushed to the right. If I want to push those buttons to the bottom, I can add a stretch to the top of the main layout. But I don't need to worry about that just yet, because there's still going to be the selection list that will sit above the buttons themselves. So first I'll create my selection list. This is going to display any objects that have been selected in the Maya scene. And it's going to be, and the control itself is going to be a QList widget. Right now it's not going to do anything. We have no way to populate this list yet, but that's not the point of creating the layout. All we want to do is get the controls properly positioned. So I'm going to add this to the main layout, and this time I want to add widget, and it's going to be self.selectionList. And again, I've added the widget before I've added the button layout, which means the selection list will be on top of the buttons. And when I run the code, you're going to see I have my selection list on top with the buttons down below. Now you may not like the margins that have been set. It's a waste of space. So I'm just going to take a minute to clean those up. In order to do that, I'm going to change the spacing on my main layout. I'm going to use a value of 2. When I run the code, you're going to see that the buttons are now much closer to the bottom of the list. But I still have the big margin on the outside. In this case, I'm just going to change the main layout margin, calling set margin, and again, I'm going to give it a value of 2. Executing the code, you're going to see that the list, as well as the buttons, are now much closer to the edge. Now, this is very much personal preference. If you want to change it, go ahead. If not, don't worry about it.